In this third video, which is Dilemmas in International Business video about work, well, it's the second part. If you remember, I left the last video where we talked about flexibilization of the company, which really had been manifesting flexibilization of the worker in terms of the growth of insecure working through temporary working and part-time working. But because of the nature of digital innovations and a requirement in order to be able to maximize their shareholder returns, is we've seen recently significant shifts in working practices. And I'm referring exclusively to what's referred to as the gig economy. Now, the gig economy is in essence where people get paid for doing a piece of work. So there's no contractual arrangement between individuals for you to provide work over an extended period of time. Is that really people are contracted in order to be able to do piecework, in effect. And piecework is something that occurred earlier in the 20th century and was deemed to be a particularly poor thing because it guaranteed no security to the people that were doing the piecework. And you were paid per item of clothing manufactured, say, for instance, or per you're paid per the amount of bricks laid, or the amount of wool shorn, or the amount of corn collected, things like that. And if there was no corn to collect or no wool to shear, you just didn't get paid. You weren't contracted to do it. And that was by and large replaced by working hours or contracted working periods where people were paid over a period of a year, an annualized amount of work for a salary, and the firm's responsibility was to find people work to do, to all intents and purposes. But with the gig economy, that's changed. Now, by and large, the gig economy has been praised as being a positive, an opportunity. On the one hand, it's seen as a response of the entrepreneurial generation, as a way of getting people into the workplace, is that people can run a different or multiple different gigs, Uber driver, Deliveroo, individual, or even something at the more skilled end, a gig accountant, say for instance, working on a contracted, short-term contracted basis. On the other hand as well is that you can see the gig economy as a concern of business to lower labour costs and reduce the firm's exposure to counterclaims of unfair labour practices, because it's been standard practice within the gig economy to claim that anybody that works within the gig economy is a subcontractor. They're self-employed subcontractors to the firm. So therefore, they're not employed by the firm. And as a consequence of that, the firm escapes its responsibilities in terms of duty of care, but also payment of any provisions that might be required either within law or within standard practice, things like maternity leave, healthcare, holiday payments, and so on and so forth. So on the one hand, you could see it as being a positive, as it provides opportunities for the ultimate flexible worker. And on the opposing side, as you can see it as being something which is a flagrant breach of the social contract by the firm in order to minimize its labor costs. And the narrative would suggest that young workers in particular are said to want to break free of confining restraints of traditional jobs. It's maintained that young people don't want to work like their parents had done, like the organizational man of the past had done. They don't want to work and feel constrained by the same employer, by the routine of working 35, 40 hours a week, whatever it is. A survey of young millennials have found that over a third have started their own businesses on the side, called sidepreneurs. working to utilise the gig ethos of entrepreneurialism, freedom, flexibilisation. Demonstrate that entrepreneurship is a viable solution to youth unemployment. So instead of trying to find younger people, graduates, work which is rewarding and viable, is that we should promote entrepreneurship amongst young people and let them sort themselves out by providing their own work opportunities. But the fact of the matter is that today, other than rhetoric, we find they're very supporting the notion of sidepreneurship or entrepreneurship more generally as being rather troublesome. But even though we've got this movement to promote entrepreneurship, sidepreneurship, sidepreneurship being working in maybe 2 or 3 different projects which are entrepreneurial in order to try and craft one's own career path out of it, even though there are many narratives and initiatives to try and support such a movement, is that actually when you start to look at where young people would like to work, and indeed look at job tenure in countries, is that actually job tenure has increased. All of the countries that I'm showing you here on this particular map are European, but nevertheless the red line is the average, and tenure of contract is increasing, which indicates actually that whilst the appeal of sidepreneurship might exist, it might exist in narrative only, and that in practice people would rather work on an annualized work basis for a salary plus the benefits that they're going to accrue, because of the fact that it is stable. The employment is stable, the income is stable. And once you have stability, particularly as you get older, is that you can plan your own futures more actively than you can if you're working in an entrepreneurial sideship portfolio type of employment practices. This graphic shows the amount of people estimated to work in the gig economy. And this is for the UK. And you can see from this is that in terms of work and where people work, the bulk currently in work, 32 million people, 4.8 million are self-employed, but there is a considerable proportion and a growing proportion that are working through online platforms, things like TaskRabbit.com and stuff like that. 1.1 million people are estimated to be working for or through platforms on a regular basis. And this is the ultimate expression of the gig economy, is that one would be employed or log into the platform in order to be able to secure work. But in many cases, what happens is that you're required to bid or make a bid for how much you would wish to be paid in order to be able to do that job. And if you're underbid by a rival, then you won't get the work. So there is a natural tendency to try and bid quite lowly in order to obtain the work in the first place, which is very beneficial, of course, for the corporations, but less so for the individual that's employed here. What's also interesting is that there's 1 million people that are estimated to work in 0-hour contracts. Now, a 0-hour contract is a work contract, a legal contract with a firm, but within it, it stipulates no required work hours, 0 hours. So you're employed, but you're not guaranteed any hours. And there are also restrictions within the employment contract in that people are not able to say no for the work, because you could lose your job. If somebody would say, well, we've got 5 hours for you next week, and you say, well, that's not enough, well, you could lose your job, or you say you didn't want to do it because for whatever reason you've got a number of different sidepreneurirships or gig details, or are engaged in perhaps being employed on different zero-hour contracts, as they tend to be quite part-time, because once you move into full-time working is that you can get corporate benefits for you as a consequence of your work. So there are approximately 1 million people in the UK that are working on zero-hour contracts for their main job. What gig workers do is interesting, because we tend to see Uber, Deliveroo, I've already mentioned them as well in order to give it away, as being the most visible form of gig working. But actually, the majority of gig working is professional working, legal advice, accounting advice, those sorts of things. Nearly a third of all people engaged in gig working do that. Now that tends to be paying at a higher premium. And as a consequence of that, for those people that require a flexible work life, that might well be quite beneficial. Although it is still gig working, is that one doesn't get paid if one's not doing any work. Now that sounds perfectly sensible, doesn't it? Is that why should you get paid if you're not doing any work? Well, you're getting paid because the firm has a responsibility for finding you the work, keeping you gainfully employed, but it's also having you on a retainer, if you like, so that should the work go up, then there's scope for people to be able to do it if the amount of work increases. The gig economy can ebb and flow as the work requirement ebbs and flows too. But back to the graphic, about a third are working in professional work, just over a quarter are working in creativity IT work, and 18% are working as skilled manual workers, plumbing, electrical work, bricklaying, that sort of thing. But nevertheless, they're still engaging in a bidding process in order to attain the work. And then below that, there's what? Almost 46%, would that be? Not quite 6%. Actually, if you just add up all of those numbers, I don't think they add up to 100, do they? Yeah, that's an interesting thing, is that gig workers are clearly working in different categories. So somebody might well be working as a skilled manual worker, but might also be doing personal services or admin work, or driving a taxi and delivering courier and so on and so forth, because there's over 100% of work there. So there's 50% of gig work is high skilled, 50% of it less so. So moving on from the gig working kind of like scenario to another aspect of digital innovation, is that gig work is obtained, administrated through platforms. But the other digital innovation that is affecting work currently is the use of robots, industrial robots. And this chart shows the number of robots being used per 10,000 employees in manufacturing. And again, this is in 2015. I haven't found any more accurate figures yet, but if you look at those countries on the graphic that are employing most robots, it's those that have got quite a high manufacturing base: Republic of Korea, Singapore, Japan, Germany. United Kingdom has got less robots than the majority of the developed economies of the world. And that might be because of the makeup of our own particular economy, is that our economy is heavily orientated towards financial services and low-paid service work, where actually it's cheaper to employ a person than it is to actually employ a robot to do it. But nevertheless, robots and the automation of work poses a threat to working practices. If you combine everything that we've talked of so far, automation, robotics, the gig economy, all being impacted by ICTs and digital innovations, has led people to suggest that the workers are a precariat It's a word that's been coined by Professor Guy Standing. The precariat is a multitude of insecure people living bits and pieces lives in and out of short-term jobs. There's no narrative of occupational development, including millions of frustrated but educated young people, millions of women exploited in oppressive labour conditions, highly flexible, ostensibly under the guise that that's what's required because of childcare requirements, which is discriminatory and is gender discrimination. Criminalised, tagged for life as criminals, being categorised, and many people being categorised as being disabled. A close connotation between the criminal and the disabled, as the disabled are attracting state benefits, as an example. Migrants and the hundreds of millions around the world are part of the precariat and will increase so under climate change as parts of the world become uninhabitable. Where will the people go? They have to go somewhere. They have these people have a restricted range of social, cultural, political and economic rights than other citizens around them. The whole nature of their being has been rendered precarious. Is it becoming more immaterial? Certainly it seems to be less material than those that are around them that gain full economic rights and economic rights and citizenship rights. And they face an economic insecurity and actually an inability to be able to control time. The one thing is that if you have a stable lifestyle and income, is that you can plan. You can control your own time. You might be able to say when you're going to go on holiday, what you're going to do at the weekend. Because your income is consistent throughout your working life. If you're precarious, you don't have that luxury. Time has been stolen from you. I mentioned earlier technological unemployment. And I think that really, as we move from an industrialized economy into the post-industrial information networked economy, the gig economy, is that we start to see the shift in working patterns. I said earlier on is that in the past we've moved from agricultural to industrial with no loss in jobs. As we move from the industrial into the post-industrial, is that full-time working is being replaced by precarious working. Keynes, I'm talking about technological unemployment, says we're being afflicted with a new disease of which some other readers may not have heard the name, but which they will hear a great deal in the years to come, namely technological unemployment. So Keynes and others had thought about the notion of being rendered unemployment by technology many years ago. Regarding a recent claim by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, automation is not going to have any kind of big effect on the economy for the next 50 to 100 years. I don't talk to anyone in the field who believes that. Recent technological innovations have the potential to render humans obsolete with the professional, white-collar, low-skilled, creative fields and other mental jobs. So there's a difference there, isn't there, between the perspective. That second bit was from McAfee, who is a technologist. So Mnuchin's view is that technology is not likely to affect working packages. This notion of technological unemployment will be compensated for. Technological change will just change the nature of jobs. It will create more jobs, different jobs. And the theory is that it will create high-skilled jobs, is that people need to learn how to code in order to be able to take advantage of the new working environment, which is all well and good, but actually, do people want to code? And is everybody capable of learning how to code? And Mnuchin's optimism is countered by McAfee's realism. Technological innovations, he says, have the potential to render humans obsolete with professional, white-collar, low-skilled, creative fields and other mental jobs. So what McAfee's saying is that automation, technological advances are not likely to impact just manufacturing work and blue-collar workers. is likely to impact all aspects of work. And people that sort of look at technology and shout it down, criticize it as being a threat to, or look at it as being employment practices being as a threat to stability, to growth, and to welfare, are very often shouted down as to say that technology creates new jobs. So it's what's known as a Luddite fallacy, and the debates are cyclical. They go round and round and round. But evidence, as I presented earlier on, demonstrates that whilst new net jobs created are zero, or possibly even negative, the jobs that are being created are not the kind of jobs that pay the kind of salaries that people used to enjoy. And above that is that they are highly flexible, they are precarious. So like much of what we've seen so far in the course, there are a number of different competing theoretical perspectives, and we need to judge them empirically. On the one hand, rising productivity, try that again, shall I? Rising productivity through technological adoption, adaptation, increases income, which in turn creates demand for new products and services that compensate for job losses. History justifies this view. Agriculture, industry, post-industrial, financial work. Just because a job can be automated, people will say, doesn't mean that it will be, which is a rather naive expectation of capitalism, I think. According to Frey and Osborne in a study that they did in 2013, 47% of all jobs are at risk of becoming automated. Nearly a half. Think about technological advance like the automated car. Notwithstanding the potential risks of getting in a car, which is based upon a sort of like a series of technology, which is, in my own opinion, pretty flaky. How do you turn an automated car on and off in order to be able to reboot it when it's running out of control down the motorway? But think about why firms would want to invest in automated technologies for cars. Why would Uber be interested in it, or Amazon be interested in it? Well, because the principal costs of a business like Uber and Amazon deliveries is the labor costs of the driver himself. In order to be able to eradicate the driver, then it reduces the cost lines and it would therefore enhance profits. But what do the displaced drivers do? Where's the new work? If you just read this. This was actually written by a computer. It's not written by a human. And it just indicates current levels of technologies and the ability to be able to automate many different roles now. What will they be able to do in the future? And again, the displaced writer, the displaced worker, is rendered immaterial, precarious. Now, there's an optimistic view, one that was is based, I think, on Keynes's letter to his grandchildren. The idea that firms become so profitable and so productive that taxation rates on corporate profits and on those people that are working within firms themselves, will always be a small number of people working within the firms, possibly getting less and less and less, but they'll become higher paid and higher paid and higher paid and higher paid, with stock options as well, one assumes. But a kind of progressive taxation on corporate profits and unemployment should provide sufficient revenue for a form of universal basic income. Now, the idea of a universal basic income is not as radical as you think, actually, is that the state of Alaska in America pays a universal basic income to all of its citizens based upon its earnings from its oil revenues. So the model's already in place. Similarly, Norwegians gain a dividend out of their sovereign wealth fund, which is financed via the profits it makes again out of its oil industry. A little bit more tenuous, but I would argue that the Singaporean Central Provident Fund is also financed by government and by Temasek, the sovereign wealth fund. And so there are examples of universal basic income existing on the planet currently. Not that radical. Well, no, it is radical, but in practice, it's practicable. Particularly as government, as we've already explained, is the monopoly supplier of its own currency. But through taxation of highly profitable, productive firms and the uber rich that will work for them, is that taxation, therefore, is seen as more of a distribution of income. Which means that through payment of a universal basic income, is that people might be in a position whereby they're much more flexible with how they choose to use their labour. Working times might decrease, which will allow me other time to either fulfil my own leisure opportunities or to, say, start a business up that I'd really like to be able to start up. It's the ultimate form of sidepreneurship in those respects. At its most extreme, this has been what's been referred to as fully automated luxury communism. Is that the tech firms, and all firms are moving towards becoming tech firms, derive profits, incomes, and therefore tax revenues to the estate, to which the disenfranchised worker is made precarious through, is made stable, beg your pardon, not precarious, is made stable through a universal basic income and a capacity to be able to live a rewarding life, where the tax rates really equate to a form of everybody has a social stake in the firms within an economy, as opposed to the firms being owned and capital being owned privately. Is that there's more of a social stake in it and a widening of that social contract under the conceptualization of fully automated luxury communism. I mention this out of interest. I have no reason to expect this to actually happen within my lifetime, but the possibilities of universal basic income might be seen sooner rather than later. So I think it's worth asking a question about the new economy, and from what we've seen about the new economy. Is it really new, or is it just the economy as we've always seen it? What's the new in this element here? New kind of practices, but the same ideologies. Does the new economy, therefore, just equate to a new high-powered or super-powered form of capitalism, therefore? I'll leave you to think about that.